We're going to get straight to it. AJ Haulcy is where we'll start, obviously. A huge commitment for the Tigers this weekend as they go out and they get the number one safety in the transfer portal. How big of a commitment is this for Brian Kelly going into 2025?
Yeah, I think it's probably the last piece of the puzzle. If you looked at maybe kind of the different positions that LSU could have attacked this spring, I think safety was maybe the last one that they hadn't yet checked. They went out and they got a defensive tackle a few weeks ago now in Bernard Gooden. I think he's a plug-and-play guy for you that's going to play a lot of snaps, but you still were wondering if they were going to look for one more safety if the right fit came along, and Haulcy certainly fits that bill. I mean, this is a guy who's got a couple years of starting experience now at Houston, played in the Big 12 last year and had some really great numbers, was an all-conference player, somebody that I think is going to be able to really fit in well with what LSU wants to do with Blake Baker's scheme, and really a veteran presence, I think, in that safety room that they needed to add. I mean, they've got some good young players in there that I think are developing, and Deshaun Spears, Javian Tobiano. You could even throw Tamarcus Cooley in there, who's only a redshirt freshman. So, I think they needed another guy in there next to Jordan Gilbert, who had some experience, had some playing time under his belt, and Haulcy's a really good tackler, and that's something that I think most LSU fans, would love to see is a strong tackler back there, and somebody that can certainly be a little bit more versatile in helping that safety room out. So this really came together in the last week. I think LSU was just kind of waiting out the Miami visit and seeing if he would commit right there on the spot to Miami. He didn't, and LSU kind of made their move and had him on campus last weekend, and I should say this past weekend, and we're able to close the deal. So it's a really strong class. I mean, it's a class now on our 247Sports site that's not only the number one class for this cycle, but it's actually the number 3 class all time when you go back to 2022 when we started tracking these portal classes. So really strong effort here from the coaching staff, from everybody to get this 18-man group of transfers in here, and most of whom I think are going to play a lot for LSU in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously touched on a little bit there at the end. The class overall, I mean, LSU needed to go out and upgrade the roster to meet the expectations in 2025. And like you said, I mean, number 1 transfer portal class, number 3 all-time over on 247. They did exactly what they needed to do. Talk about this class overall, as well as just the offseason that LSU was able to have.
Yeah, I think they filled a lot of needs. I mean, when you look at this last year's roster, they lost a lot of veteran guys that had played a lot of football for them, and they needed to replenish that with some experienced and veteran players who had production at the Power 4 level, and they were able to go out and get 18 of these guys, filling them up on both offense and defense. And look, I think for LSU that the most important thing was to get some production on the defensive side of the ball, get some fresh blood in here, some new voices, some new leaders, and I think they're going to get that. And guys like Jack Pyburn, and you certainly look at Monster Delane in the secondary. I think those are going to be some real staple leaders for your defense next year. You did a really nice job of kind of getting those edge rushers signed, and with Pyburn and Peyton and Jamari Butler, I think those guys are going to play a lot for you. On the interior with Gooden and Sadir Mitchell, I really like that grouping as well, with some of the returning production that you have from guys like McKinley and Bro, who are young players in that defensive tackle room. I really like what they were able to do, obviously, now with Haulcy on defense. So I think there's probably 6 or 7 guys on defense that they just signed that are probably going to be day one starters. I mean, I know that the depth chart's not officially filled out yet or anything like that, but just the way that it was tracking in the spring, and certainly what you hope to see develop here in the summer and the fall camp, I think there's going to be a lot of new but veteran faces that are going to be on this defense that should help LSU get back to where they want to be on that side of the ball. And then offensively, I think they really knocked it out of the park with the wide receiver signings that they have. I think once he's healthy, Nick Henderson and Barian Brown are going to be real contributors to this thing on the receiver end. We just haven't seen Anderson a whole ton yet in spring ball. He was starting to get, I think, a little bit more back to himself towards the end of spring camp, and certainly these next few summer months are going to be really important for him and Nussmeier to kind of lock down that timing and that chemistry as a wide receiver quarterback duo. So really like what they did with the receivers. I mean, I think Bauer Sharp was maybe the most impressive transfer that they brought in this past spring in terms of how quickly he was able to acclimate to the offense, and he was a very consistent producer in the spring, whether it was with the first or the second team. He had some really nice catches, really good route running, and he has a little bit more speed, I think, than people might realize too. So he's going to be a valuable piece at that tight end spot. And then on the offensive line, you've got Braylon Moore, the Virginia Tech transfer, and then you've got Josh Thompson, the Northwestern transfer. Both of those guys were kind of sliding in and out, mostly with the second team. Braylon Moore some with the first team towards the end of spring. I would imagine both of those guys get more opportunities with the first team in the fall camp session to really kind of peg down that starting five and see, get some veteran presence in there. This is going to be such a new offensive line that I think that's going to be the big question mark, I think, for this offense. It's just how quickly those guys up front can gel, what the best combination is. And honestly, we might not know that very early into the season. This could be a situation where LSU has a starting five against Clemson that's different against Florida a couple weeks later. I think they're going to have to really have some trial and error there against some really good opponents to kind of figure out who the best five are for their offensive line going forward.
Yeah, I mean, sticking with that, how much concern does that give you that they might have to do trial and error at that spot? I mean, with how good this roster is and how well it's been constructed, thinking about going into, Clemson, which is a college football playoff team last year, with a starting five at the O-line, which might not be your best five. How much concern does that bring you?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting because, I've been watching or looking at a lot of way too early mock drafts and stuff, and Clemson's got 4 or 5 guys that are in the first round. So that's going to be a real challenge, a real litmus test, I think, for this entire team, really. But certainly on the offensive line, you want to be able to find the best five for that game and stick with it. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of rotating in and out just to see if there's some good looks or different looks that they can offer on the offensive line. But, I mean, that's going to be the main key here, right? I mean, you want to improve in the run game. You want to improve in terms of protecting Garrett Nussmeier. You're just looking to get better, I think, all across the board on the offensive line. And when you're having to replace 4 starters, you've got to really start from ground zero and building this thing back up. And they have some really good, interesting young players that are coming up the program. I really like Tyree Adams. I like Weston Davis. I like some of the freshmen they brought in Carius Kern and Solomon Thomas. How many of those guys are able to crack the rotation, though, early in the season? I think we know Adams and Davis are kind of the shoe-ins for the tackle spots, but man, those interior positions are still way up in the air, and I just don't know exactly where they're going to lean as we sit here in May. So that it's going to be a real I don't want to say challenge, but it's going to be a real question mark, I think, until we get to the actual games, what that group is going to look like and how effective they're going to be, especially with such a strong schedule early in the season.
Yeah, and looking at the offseason that they just had, is it safe to say that the buy-in from an NIL standpoint is what completely shifted LSU's offseason? Because, I mean, you look back to last offseason, before the 2024 season, I mean, LSU identified a need of defensive tackle, went out in the spring window and tried to get guys, but weren't able to close the deal. Now you fast forward to right now, LSU in the spring window identified needs and went out, closed those deals. Is that solely a NIL kind of desire, like a willingness to commit to NIL, that they were able to get these deals done?
Yeah, they're light years ahead of where they were maybe this time a year ago in that NIL realm. I think they've really dedicated themselves to making sure that that's a poignant part of this program, and being able to compete with the big boys, or being one of the big boys in terms of being able to secure some of these top end players. And I mean, if you look at our own 247 sports industry rankings, I think LSU has 7 of the top 100 players in those transfer rankings right now, and those guys they're not cheap for sure, but you've got to be able to also make those pitches and make sure that you're getting the playing time and just opportunity to come play at a place like this. That stuff figured out as well. But certainly the NIL component, I think, is in a much better spot than it was at this time a year ago, for example. And look, LSU had a strategy last year where they weren't going to overpay for a player that may or may not have been a serious contributor to the team, and this year they've certainly adjusted course, and they're finding the best players at the best positions, and they're going to be very aggressive with going after them and getting them signed. So that's a very different strategy from where they were at this time a year ago, and it's one that they're banking pays off here in 2025. They've poured a lot of resources into this thing, certainly from a recruiting perspective, from an NIL perspective, and just an overall roster and talents perspective. It's one of the more talented rosters that I've seen here in quite some time, and I think that they're certainly poised to be a playoff contending team. We'll just see if they have enough to get them through what's going to be a really difficult schedule here in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, before you came on, we were kind of breaking down the schedule. I mean, that first month of football, you've got Clemson, Florida, and Ole Miss all in the first 5 weeks of your season. I mean, if things really go bad, you could look at being 2-3 going into October, which is just, at this point with this roster would be essentially unacceptable. I mean, to you, it's college football playoff or bust with the roster they've put together, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like I think that they wanted to be a college football playoff team last year. Like they were publicly saying that before the season, and this roster I think is much, much better than last year. So if you're not able to get into it this year, then there's that's a real problem for LSU. So I think they've set themselves up here well. But the one thing I will say is like they have to find the chemistry angle of this thing too, right? Because they've got so many new pieces here. I mean, between the freshmen and transfer class, I think it's 41 new players that are in the program that they've got to get assimilated and kind of ingratiated into this program over the next several months. And it's going to be a real it's going to test this coaching staff, and it's going to test how good they are. And I think that's something that they embrace and something they want to do.
And how difficult is kind of that aspect of college football? When you're constructing your roster, obviously it's kind of broken down into phases where you build the roster, and the phase between putting it together and playing games is really that chemistry building. In this new transfer portal era, how difficult is it to kind of put that chemistry together, and how much of that relies on the coaching staff to get done and just on the players themselves?
It's interesting you bring that up because Brian Kelly, one of the questions I had for him in our final spring kind of get together with him was just what these summer months look like, and he said a lot of it's going to be on player accountability. Like they've got to go out there and make sure that they're putting in the time and the effort, because the coaching staff, at least the on-field coaching staff, can only have so much time with them. They're not allowed to be on the field with them at all for these player-run practices that they'll have in June and July. They'll be working out. They'll be trying to get throwing sessions together and things of that nature throughout most of the summer, just to kind of continue to develop that chemistry. So I think a good portion of the summer, it's going to be on the players, and how good they look coming into fall camp is going to be on the work that they put in during the summer. So very interested to see what that process looks like over the next couple months. I think the one thing that they have going for them is that they have a strong leadership group. I think they have some really vocal leaders in Garrett Nussmeier and Jack Pyburn and several others. Jacobian Guillory can certainly be thrown into that mix. Whit Weeks. But I think they've got to have buy-in across the board, and that's something that I think Brian Kelly and this staff are going to be watching closely this summer to see how many guys are in the building every day and working out and doing all the things that they need to do to be the best versions of themselves going into the fall, and which is going to be a really competitive fall camp because there are so many positions that are still up in the air and not decided at this point.
Yeah, and one of the questions we've got in the chat, Joe Sloan and Garrett Nussmeier going into their second season, together and at their specific spots of offensive coordinator and starting quarterback. How much of a difference do you expect to see growth-wise from both of those guys going into their second year?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the focus, after a first-year starter at quarterback is always going to be on that player and the development that he has. And certainly when you look at the last half decade and players, or I should say quarterbacks that have been able to really up their game in their second year, it's pretty elite in terms of that respect. So I expect Nuss to be much better this coming off season or this coming year. I think he's got just a lot of arm talent that is still untapped, and if he can kind of hone in some of his decision making and reading defenses and things of that nature, while also I think if he is a little bit more aggressive in terms of knowing when to run and when to use his legs, that could open up a lot of things for him as well. But much like a quarterback, I think a second-year play caller can also really grow in his second season as a primary guy. And look, I think Joe Sloan understands that there were a lot of I don't want to say vanilla, but just a lot of play calls last year that could have gone different ways for that offense and made it a little bit better. And so I think that they've really focused on the run game this spring. I think they're going to focus on it a lot this offseason and trying to get that aspect of the game a little bit more complementary to what they want to do in the passing game. I don't think they want to have Nussmeier throwing it 45, 50 times a game like he was in a couple of those SEC games last year. So you've got to be able to balance it out with the run. And they have some really talented running backs, whether it's Caden Durham, Caleb Jackson, certainly Harlan Berry, the freshman, and then JT Lindsay is another freshman that'll be here this summer. So they've got some talent back there. It's just how do they utilize those guys' skill sets the best, and how do they complement them with what they want to do with Nussmeier in this passing game. I think that's going to be a real area of focus for them this summer and certainly into the fall.